What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video, and in today's video we're going to be talking about the prequel to the Hunger Games franchise, and that is Hunger Games: The Ballad of the Songbirds and Snakes. Directed by Francis Lawrence, who's been directing this franchise since the second installment of the franchise and has also directed films like I Am Legend. This film stars people like Rachel Zegler, Tom Blyth, Viola Davis, Hunter Schafer, Josh Andres Rivera, and many more. So I haven't gotten around to tackling the Hunger Games franchise here on the channel yet since I started it, but it is a franchise I've always intended on doing a rewatch of and covering here on the channel. And to be completely and utterly honest, I liked the first Hunger Games, I loved the second one, Catching Fire, and then the two-part Mockingjay movie. I enjoy a lot about the two of those films, but I'm not necessarily in love with those films. It didn't necessarily end for me on a high point. So when I heard that they were going to be making a prequel that was going to specifically focus on Snow, the big bad of the other films, I was like, okay, let's see what they can do here. I wasn't necessarily crazy excited. Of course, like probably most of you who had been going to the theater over the course of the last year, there was a lot of marketing for this film. I feel like I saw the trailer pretty much every single time I went to go see a movie. So, you know, I was ready enough for this movie, but I wasn't necessarily going in excited. But I'm happy to say I honestly really enjoyed the film. Before I get too far into this also, if it does seem like I'm a little bit more hushed than I typically am, it's because my roommate is sleeping in the room behind me, and I want to be a little bit respectful. I'm up a little bit early today for a family outing, and so I figured, hey, let me knock this video out while I'm waiting for my fiance to get ready. But again, if I sound a little bit more hushed than usual, I'm just trying to be a little bit more considerate, but I won't be here whispering either. So here we are now with Hunger Games: The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which is a very long title, and of course is based on the book that is a prequel to the other books and the other films. And this one specifically focuses on the character of Coriolanus Snow, who in this film is played by Tom Blyth, but in the original films where we see him much older, he's the big bad. He is the president of the Hunger Games pretty much, and he's the one who is the game maker, and he's played by Donald Sutherland in those films. And I was also always under the impression that his name was Cornelius Snow and not Coriolanus, and in this film everybody's calling him Corio for short, so that was something that my brain was not really lining up with. For some reason, I got to go back and revisit those movies, but I always thought they were calling him Cornelius Snow. Maybe they changed his name later on, I don't really remember, but in this film, his name is Coriolanus Snow. So it's close enough, but it was enough to kind of jumble my brain. And like I said, he's played by Tom Blyth, who I think does a really great job in this role. When I originally saw a lot of the posters, early images, and the trailer, I felt like he just didn't really look or sound like Donald Sutherland enough for me to really feel like he was a good prequel choice. However, I'm happy to say that I do think he brings a lot to the character, and something I was curious about with this movie is that the movie has to kind of leave us on a point where we know he is going to be the new big bad moving forward, because he is the big bad in the main Hunger Games movies. But this movie spends a lot of time focusing on him being a fairly decent individual, and obviously kind of shows his turn to darkness over the course of time. Now, if you've never seen the other Hunger Games movies, I guess you could say that it's a spoiler, but this whole premise is based around showing us the prequels of the big bad of the other films, so I feel like you kind of have to know that going into this. And for anybody who's unfamiliar with what the Hunger Games is and what the world is all about, there's the capital where all the rich folk live, where all the people who are the high-end individuals live, and then there are the various districts. There was a war that happened in the past between the capitals and the districts, and now the capital kind of keeps control of all the districts. Most of the people in the districts are poor and starving, and because of this, now every year there's this thing called the Hunger Games. This is the 10th annual one in this film, where they essentially bring a boy and a girl from each district to come and combat each other in an arena, kill one another, the last man standing style, and it's kind of something that's televised for everybody to see, most notably the people in the capital. Of course, the people in the districts hate the rich folk in the capital, and vice versa. The people in the capital hate the district individuals and see them as low-life individuals. This franchise has always had some pretty heavy themes when it comes to the divide between rich and poor, and I think for the most part this movie definitely doubles down on that same idea. When the movie opens up, we're introduced to Tom Blyth as Coriolanus Snow, who lives in the capital, but him and his family are one of the more poor families within that world. Because of this, he'd like to make a name for himself, and the movie opens up and he's actually going to a ceremony where he's hoping that he's going to win this prize for being one of the top students in the academy at the capital. Him and various other students are waiting to hear who's the winner of the prize, and then they end up finding out that they're changing things this year. Instead of just giving you the prize for being the top student, instead you now have to be a mentor to one of the tributes who's going to be in the Hunger Games. And if you're able to make them a bit of a spectacle, if you're able to make them entertaining, somebody that the capital and the districts can root for, and somebody who can possibly win the Hunger Games, then you will be more eligible for this prize. And this prize money is something that Coriolanus really needs to be able to get his family out of a life of poverty. Most notably, his sister, Tigress, who is a character we saw in the other films as well, and this time around is played by Hunter Schafer. That's when we're introduced to the character of Lucy Gray Baird, played by Rachel Zegler, who ends up becoming a bit of a love interest for Coriolanus Snow. He decides to try to be the best mentor he can possibly be for her going into the Hunger Games, and of course, like a lot of movies like this, he starts to build a romance with her. There starts to be some distrust as things have to start getting a little bit messy in order for him to get her to survive and for him to kind of rise a bit in the ranks that he wants to rise up into. And that's the base premise. You have this mentor with his own personal agenda to try to get money to be able to protect his own family, but he is part of this world of the capital, who starts to fall in love with this woman who is mentoring, who's from one of these districts, who's one of these poor people that a lot of the people in the capital just kind of look as kind of like fodder, just kind of throwaway human beings. And now he has to help her survive the Hunger Games while also kind of battling this personal connection that the two of them are building. And there's a lot more that plays out throughout the course of the film, with some pretty interesting and endearing characters that are conflicted across everything that's going on here. And beyond them, you have some pretty big names here like Viola Davis, who plays the character of Dr. Volumnia Gao, who is the game maker. She's the one who's in charge of putting the games together. She's essentially the president of the Hunger Games. And then you also have Peter Dinklage in here, who actually plays the creator of said Hunger Games. So you have a lot of various characters here with a lot of various motivations, a lot of confliction between a lot of characters. You got a romance story in here, you got action, you got some big open, big world building kind of spectacle at times too, with this dystopian universe that is the Hunger Games franchise. And overall, I just really found it to be a very well shot, very well acted film that has a lot of drama, kept me engaged throughout. And honestly, I never really found myself overly bored in any moments, even though the movie is fairly long, coming in at 2 hours and 37 minutes. And this is the movie that easily could have gone downwards when it comes to that, but I ultimately think that they used their screen time for the most part in a pretty strong way, with this probably being one of my favorite films in their Hunger Games franchise. But like I mentioned, it is a longer film, and I think that where this film really struggled for me is in its third act. I think the first 2 acts of this film are awesome. I had a ton of fun watching it. Again, it is a longer film, and it's split up into 3 big acts. They have chapters that pop up on the screen at the beginning of these various acts. And I think the first 2 acts do an incredible job of building up tension, giving you a lot of excitement for what's to come. And it all kind of comes to a close at the end of the second act, feeling like the end of the movie. The end of the second act for me, and I think everybody else that I went to see the movie with and some others that I've spoken to, felt like the end of the movie. But the movie continues on, as I apparently assume that the book does as well, kind of giving us what feels like a very long epilogue after the main events of the film that really kind of just slowed the pacing of the film down pretty tremendously. And I really found that the third act, unfortunately, had us in this situation where they kind of had to rush some of the character development to get our characters where we know that they will be at the end of the film so that it connects with the other films, most notably the character of Coriolanus Snow. I feel like he's a character that's rather endearing, so a character that you can really latch onto, a character that you really are rooting for throughout the course of the film. And it feels that in the last 20 minutes or so, even though the film does pretty good with characterization up to the end, it felt like there were some things they needed to kind of rush to kind of wrap up to get Coriolanus Snow to the point that we expect him to be at the end of the movie. Because of that, I felt like the movie kind of went down a little bit for me. It went down a couple of notches in terms of my enjoyment, with the third act just kind of feeling like something that maybe should have been the beginning of another movie. Now, I was talking to another peer of mine, Dave from Interpreting the Stars, who mentioned maybe they just didn't want to do another 2-part Hunger Games movie, which I totally understand. I don't even know that the source material would really allow for them to create a whole nother movie, but for the most part, I enjoyed this film. I found it to be very well made, very well acted, very well shot. I found that the special effects throughout the course of the film looked really solid, with a great use of costume design, practical locations, practical sets, all that kind of stuff that really added to the franchise. And I think that's always been a praise I've had of this, whether it be the wardrobe department and the special effects and different things like that. I think the Hunger Games franchise has always been on top of their game with that. You also have a great musical score that's given here by James Newton Howard, who of course has scored tons of fantastic movies and gives us another really great tension building score here in this film. And you have have great performances, like I said, like really genuinely great performances. I thought that Tom Blyth was great. I thought that Rachel Zegler was great in the role. I thought that characters like Viola Davis's character, as well as Peter Dinklage's character, were really great. And I really also enjoyed the character played by Josh Andres Rivera. I found him to be pretty solid throughout the course of the film as well. And so there was a lot of various characters with a lot of various motivations that had a lot of various conflictions. Some characters that felt more wicked than others, characters that felt a lot more afraid than others, some characters that felt very brave. You have a really nice group of characters that you really do get to know by the time you get to the end of the runtime. And I think that that's where I struggled the most when I got to the end of that third act, and it felt like certain things were kind of getting wrapped up a little bit quicker when we had nearly 3 hours to slowly do some character development. It felt like some of the characterization in the last 15 to 20 minutes felt rather abrupt. If I can that's probably the best way I can put it, honestly. It felt a little bit abrupt with the way these characters kind of shifted in the near end part of the film, that again just felt like it needed to happen in order for us to kind of line up the events of this movie with what we've seen before in the other Hunger Games movies. However, with all that said, I really enjoyed the film. As I said, I do think it's definitely worth checking out if you're a fan of the Hunger Games franchise. I think there's a lot of fun to be had here. If you're like me and you were kind of just like, maybe I'll enjoy it, maybe I won't enjoy it, I think it's definitely worth checking out if you just are a fan of action and tension and drama. There's a lot of great stuff like that in here, a lot of really great dystopian world building, and I think for the most part they pretty much nailed it here with this movie. So I definitely want to hear what you guys have to say, so hit that like button, comment your thoughts, subscribe for more videos, and I'll see you beautiful people in the next one. Bye bye.